Now, I say in the prayer there that we're looking at the next phase, which is the Reformation. That doesn't mean we're actually going to look at the Reformation today, okay? That's going to be in the next church age. But everything that we're talking about is all the critical explosion of stuff that's going to, that's really going to launch the Reformation. Want to remember that, as with all of history, there are always precursors to things for why movements come about and stuff like that. Sometimes they're like simmering underneath, and then all of a sudden the heat gets turned up, and things go to a boil right away. Okay, because they had been simmering all along. Okay, if they're not simmering, if they were cold and you turn the heat up, well, it's gonna go through a simmering process and then boiling. But no, things are simmering right now. At the end of this church age, you're talking like 1300, like 1300, 1500. That's where you get your critical time. Now, um, in that vein, there are certain things that we know from history that have really advanced cultures over each other. One of the things, specifically like in geopolitics, the nature of the terrain that people occupied was critical to the development of civilization. So that specifically, for instance, when you look at Europe, it had just it was just ripe for being able to have change. The coastline of Europe is larger than the coastline of Africa. And you look at the map, and you say, Africa's a big country. And you look at Europe, it's not as big a country. What it is they have all the ins and outs that give you your coastline that also form harbors. This was a detriment to Africa for development of civilization. You also had navigable rivers, or is it navigable? Navigable. I like navigable. Okay, rivers in Europe that you didn't have in Africa, which also facilitated cultural development. When you look at Russia or China, you don't even have the same thing as you have in Europe. So Europe there was a reason why it was more attuned for that. Then when you get to America, you have even greater navigation, and you had also trade routes that had been established. And so America, with its north and south river systems, uh, became uh, uh, became more conducive to the development of civilization. However, Indians, while they were occupying, were so far from each other that they didn't have a chance for interconnectivity. They would sort of go in and kill each other off, unlike what they like to teach us today about. They were all peaceful nature lovers and things like that, who were also into cannibalism and sacrifice and things like that, and taking over territories. So when they say this land was owned by Indians, you say, which ones? Okay, the ones before, the ones before that, or the ones before that. Now let's find them, and then we'll say, well, this land belonged to them. Anyhow, off my political diatribe. So different things will be conducive to the development of civilization. And Europe, like I said, was very ripe for that, just geopolitically. But you also had the spread of Christianity and thinking. That contributed to that, which is what we're going to look at a little bit more today. In the development of civilization, you'll also have the ability to conquer other people. For instance, you would have your foot soldiers. I am thinking of, for instance, the Spartans would have what they called a phalanx, and a phalanx was a triangular formation that you would go into another army, and then you would pierce them, and it would divide like a triangle does, like a wedge does. And they would have their long Spartan spears that would reach out, and you'd have this army of spears that would precede that phalanx, and they would go into those areas, and that they were just really good warriors. the Romans came along with their short swords, and with their shorts, when using a short sword, they would go and they could push up down the spears, and they were able to defeat the Spartans. But then you had the rise of the cavalry. Now, when they first introduced the horse, it was a wonderful advancement in military power. But there was a thing about the horse they didn't use, which was stirrups. Okay, the armies that discovered the use of stirrups, the horse then became a mounted platform that they could fight from. So now, when you had the stirrups, those armies became the conquerors. Then you had the development of use of the use of chariots, and now you had a real platform, military platform, like tanks or whatever, to work from. So I say all that to say that these military developments, you if you didn't know about it, you think, oh yeah, they had horses. Yeah, no, there was development as you went along the way for that. In the same way as you see developments like that, same thing happens culturally that that enabled uh, society to go from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance and Reformation. Renaissance is still considered part of this particular church age. It's like the final um, boiling point that's going to kick off the Reformation, and we start things from the age of the Reformation on. So we see this simmering aspect that's going on um, in the Middle Ages, with the power being, trying to be held by Rome, and Rome was trying to increase its power over the state, as over religion, first of all, over spirituality in the church. But because of the fall of the Roman Empire, you got about 1,000 years of work at trying to be the Pope, trying to be the power over the empire as well. Now, what was going on at this time economically was also significant, that would lead to the Renaissance. uh, while you were um, in the villa estates of the Roman system, the Roman government, you had people that were working there in the villas. There would be slaves, there would be tenant farmers, and they all essentially worked for the state, for the good of the Roman state. Okay, they might have been under the power of the Roman lords, but the Roman lords were the Roman state. When you had the breakup of the Roman Empire, what you would get next is the breakup of of the estates, whether they would be in a Germanic kingdom or a French kingdom or whatever. But there was not just that breakdown where you had a French king and a German king and an Italian king. What you also had was further breakdown. So you had the manor system, which was the feudal system. Now, what you had was the tenant farmers or serfs that were loyal to their manor, and the manor would try to be a self-sufficient economic system. Okay, so it's kind of kind of reminds me of when I was going to the Coast Guard Academy, where I wanted to put in my nice career, and I wanted to become a subsistence farmer. Now, a subsistence farmer, you might think of somebody who's just scratching out, stuff. I'm just eating the roots as I go along, or finding some berries on the property and picking them and eating them. No, a subsistence farmer was one who tried to be able to have something, to have a farm that operated mostly by itself. It was very self-sufficient. It was really kind of cool. You know, I used to read Mother Earth News, which was big on that kind of thing and how to do canning and stuff like that. Chicken manure makes the best methane for using for creating gas that you could use. You have to put it through a filter and stuff like that, get rid of the acids in the gas. But all those things were like that. Become your own smithy and things like that, and be nearly Amish. Okay, nearly Amish because I'd be a Baptist subsistence farmer, and that's the way these manor estates would work until you had the growth of the economies as as urbanization developed. You had now people more living more in closer connection to each other, and you had uh, a rise in the economic system that was more free market. Okay, instead of serving just your manor and serving your lord and then eking out your living on that manor there, you had trade that was going on between these craftsmen and these tenants amongst each other, a rise in a banking system. So just like you had the stirrup that made the difference for the military might, and then the chariots, and then you go on from there. As you had those developments, you also had now for this Renaissance period to kick off. You had the free market system that was developing, and banking was developing because now you had an exchange of currency. Instead of just bartering elements, you had a greater exchange of currency to make this possible. In fact, the who's it's the Crusaders. One of the things that made the Crusaders able to go out on the march was you would have a bank back up in Rome who had a branch down closer to the battlefront, closer to Jerusalem. And so you had, they didn't have the internet to be able to do banking overnight, and they didn't have Zelle, okay, but they had the records and things like that, so that you could deposit your money in one place and pick your money up in another place, and that was one of the things that facilitated the Crusades. So, so with people having greater trade because they had more of a free market system. It wasn't a total free market, but it was developing. You had craft guilds that were those were unions, okay, essentially craft guilds that were developing. You had and again urbanization. You had a greater sense of touch with other areas. This is going to fuel the Reformation because you've got a communication of ideas. One of the things I'll get to in a moment is also going to, again, affect this change point was going to be the printing press. Okay, just like we went from handwritten documents and hand copying. Now you get the explosion of books that's possible because of the printing press, and the Renaissance was fueling that that printing press. I'll get into that in a moment too. So just as you had the printing press, you go all the way up to the time where we have radio. That's an awfully big time period to go through for development of communication, development of technology for communication. The radio and telephone and this electronic means would be the next great advancement in the explosion of communication. Radio, a short time later, television. From television to computerization, and now we live in a digital economy. You go from the digital economy, the next thing was Joe Rogan. It was something that happened under our noses. Okay, in just 4 years' time, you went from the major media being able to promote that was still able to promote candidates to where the major media is no longer major. Okay. When Trump listened to an advisor and he went on the Joe Rogan show for a 3-hour broadcast and somebody else didn't, okay, they were shooting themselves in the foot. And it was not just Joe Rogan; it was other podcasting features there. When Elon Musk took over Twitter and opened it up, again, now you've got an explosion of communications that was going on, and somebody missed that whole step that was taking place. Okay. So pardon me for talking about politics, but the idea of hiding in one's basement and not doing interviews was a very bad idea. The only worst idea is if they'd done the interviews. Okay. So then you find out things even faster. But they discovered that you can't just use the debates where you have essentially bumper sticker slogans and get by. You can't just get by saying, joy, joy, joy. Okay. You have to have that communication. And again, as I said, right under the nose, there was this built-in podcasting system. You have your next major explosion. And so it'll be interesting 4 years from now to see what developments come out of that. So this is where the printing press fits in, is in these explosive moments where they become the catalyst for a whole new area of interest to develop. And this is what was happening as the medieval Catholic system, the medieval Roman system, was abusing its power and to the max. I mean, like 10 times over. It was not just abuse, it was like rampant abuse and rampant claim of power and exercise of power. And you bring in now the Renaissance thinking. They were ready for it to change on a dime. And like I say, it might seem like a couple of 100 years, but back then, a couple of 100 years was pretty fast for things to happen. And it would take a couple of 100 years for groups to thrive. Okay, so we are on page 157, and and we're looking at the fall of Constantinople. So let's okay, no, I've got scholasticism first, because scholasticism was the um, okay. I might have to put a couple of. I'm going to put a couple of things here. So I need them. I need them all. We'll put them all up there. Okay. Scholasticism, you want to remember, was a system of learning where they tried to depend upon philosophy more. Now, Maria had asked about this, and although there were, and I went back to check things because I remember studying philosophy, and I remember looking at early, ancient philosophers. You're going up to like Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. But by the time you got to the church, you didn't really have philosophy being developed. There was a philosophical effect on the church, but it was really, you didn't have outside philosophy that was operating. It was some and not much that was operating within the church. As you got to the Reformation and you had the breakdown of society, and so you had people, Renaissance thinkers who were examining everything. You started getting the development of philosophy as philosophy apart from religion. And that's where you have the true renewal of interest in philosophy. You would get it amongst the Germans, just all kinds of people. You're talking Locke and just about, so many other names out there. But before that time, you really had dogmatic pronouncements by the Catholic Church that were being used. Part of the reason was because they did not have the original scriptures to look at. They were looking at a translation of the scriptures. They were not interested in delving into understanding the hermeneutics, the study of scriptures. They were just taking the religious pronouncements of the Catholic leaders, and that's what they were depending on. Scholasticism comes along, and it starts putting in an okay, you ready for this one? An Aristotelian, okay, um, uh, effect on everything. They were following Aristotle with his logic. The trouble was, and this is a thing with logic, and I talk about this all the time, and I hope to convey the logic that they used lent itself to nitpicking. Okay, it was stuff that was applied, and they would, you start off with some assumptions, and you can go anywhere with that. And so, I will refer to deductive logic in that way. When you think of deductive logic, think about when you were in geometry class. How many people had geometry? How many people remember that they had geometry? Okay. How many people remember doing proofs? Remember doing proofs? That's deductive logic, where you start off with some givens and you build them and use them to be able to prove your next steps. Okay, so they are forms. I can reduce it down even further, and I can say, if 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 + 2 = 4, then 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. And I can prove that with, the transitive property of equality, and we can go from there, and we can say those are our deductive forms. So, like equations or proofs for doing something. Now, that works fine as long as you've got a very good premise to start with. The trouble is if you got lousy premises to start with. And so in scholasticism, they did indeed um, try to use deductive proofs along the way of Aristotle. But if you start off with lousy premises, then you're going to come up with lousy conclusions, and they did. So scholasticism was a little bit better of an effect than dogmatic theology, but because dogmatic theology was depending on the Latin Vulgate and not dependent on true biblical analysis, uh, they gave assumptions. The scholastics came along with bad assumptions. They started off actually with some good stuff, but it devolved into uh, into nitpicking and over applying and things like that. So what you come up with after scholasticism, and I'm going to point out, let me get it here, the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Remember that I've been saying that the fall of Constantinople marks the time when the Eastern scholarship comes over into the West, and they come along with the printing press. So now you've got books being able to be um, multiplied, and you've got the Eastern, and I don't, when I say Eastern, I mean Eastern Roman thinking, not from the mysticism of the Far East and things like that. So you've got this revival of learning. So Renaissance meaning renewal. Uh, the renewal was based on this thinking. Now, a lot of people, when they think about the Renaissance, they think about some Renaissance fairs where everybody does cosplay. I thought that was an interesting term that was ever invented, costume playing, and they get dressed up in knights and they go out and joust with each other on bicycles and things like, well, I don't know if they do bicycles, but they go out and do these kind of things. You have Renaissance fairs. Um, but if you go beyond the Renaissance fairs and you look at the Renaissance, you say, I'm a real Renaissance man. What you're saying is that you're into learning. You would be into what was called the humanities. Humanism at that time period was not what we think of humanism today. We think, in fact, humanism today is dubbed secular humanism. That is, man being in control of his secular environment. The humanists of that day, what they were doing was saying, we don't need the clergy to dictate things to us. We can think on our own. See, that was a better kind of humanism, okay, that where they were talking about freedom of thought that has devolved uh, into secular humanism, which says we're free of God also. Okay, so early humanism was not free of God. Secular humanism was devoid of God. One of the great humanists was a guy by the name of Erasmus. Erasmus, he took all the new learning that was coming over and he said, let's look at the Greek scriptures. Well, this was not done in a vacuum. Looking at Greek scriptures was also just a general effect of let's look at all the classical languages. Let's go back and revive the philosophies and the arts and the sciences of of the time period before the Middle Ages. Remember, in the Middle Ages, everything is sort of broken up and stretched out all over the place, and as such, they were, they didn't have a lot of thinking together. Well, now they're thinking together and they're producing, or they're coming up with all these works and they're checking out everything. So arts and sciences, as well as theology, are coming about. That's why at the fall of Constantinople and the Renaissance, that's when you're going to get renewed philosophy as its own discipline. Okay, before that, again, you had philosophy that was effective in the church, but you'll now start to get philosophy as its own discipline that doesn't care about the arguments that are going on by all the reformers and the Catholic Church. So that's why you'll get that. Okay, so and all of this is contained, okay, in paragraphs 428 under the fall of Constantinople and on from there. I'm sort of um, digesting it here for you, but you can read about it. And the reading, I recommend you do the reading. It's interesting stuff. Uh, this on page 158 and 159. I wanted to read this, completely, but it tends to be a little bit drier. But I would recommend reading it on your own to get the details of everything. Um, okay, so. Um, so even looking at the bottom of page 158, the very last line, the study of antiquity became an enthusiasm. Okay, this is where I said the arts and sciences were now developed, not just theology. And now, when we look at the Renaissance in school, they focus on the arts. Okay, we want to focus on the introduction of the original text. The monastic libraries were ransacked for manuscripts of the Greek and Roman classics, which were regarded as more precious than gold. Um, let me see. Okay, at the bottom of that paragraph, architecture, painting, and sculpture participated in the great aesthetic awakening. That's aesthetic, the arts awakening. Popes and civil rulers alike were lavish in their expenditures on literature, architecture, and the fine arts. So, um, okay, so they promoted the aesthetic far more than religious advancement. I'm looking at the top of page 159, the second paragraph. I'm not trying to read through here. I'm just trying to pick statements out here. Um, so the aesthetic is developed far more than religious advancement, but religious advancement was going on. Now, what would happen during this particular time period was as you had free markets developing, you had explosion of learning. You've got, as I said before, the printing press. You can see it up on the screen there around 1440. This is what led into the High Renaissance period. And you had the reformers and the pre-reformers before them. They are going to be now participating in that humanism. They are going to be studying scriptures. They are going to be developing their arguments because now you have more of a free market in thinking as well. Now, they're not going to do it very well, okay? Because remember, they're still coming out of a system um, where you have the church state system. So over in Switzerland, you're going to get figures like Calvin, who's going to persecute some Baptist like believers, kill a few of those. You're going to have the state church. Now, by the way, they did make advancements with the Reformed Church over there. But they carried at that time period, they're carrying over a few bad habits. Okay. Luther is going to be aligned with the German princes, and because of that, he's going to be able to survive. Whereas in another age, he might have been assassinated long before this. But he's got, again, the development of these states and the local powers who are rebelling against the Catholicism. And so he's going to be protected by them. Uh, so, so, um, so this printing press, um, uh, development of the economic systems, the influx of the writings, both secular and sacred, the original languages. Now people are going to start studying, not according to the scholastics. They're going to be studying the original languages. They're not going to depend on what the Catholic Church said in their dogma. They're not going to depend upon the Latin Vulgate. Now they want to say, let's see what's underlying all of this. Bam, you start getting sola scriptura, where people um, are now um, maximizing the significance of the scriptures in church. Okay, I will finish off with yeah. I'm going to take Joe in just a moment here. I'm going to finish off with two more things. Okay, on page 160, I'm going to talk about the press not conducive to the spread of Islam, and we're going to look at the advancement on Bible translations. Brother Joe.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that the press was not conducive to the spread of Islam, but the spread of Islam was conducive to the study of these texts because that's why they were coming over
Yeah.
to the West because they were being forced out of, um, settlements and things like that. And with the conquering of Islam, that they were, and they were destroying and pillaging everything in its sights. So the scholars felt the need to to escape for their lives, but also to escape with their texts.
Yeah. 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 So whenever you think you got power, that's about the time you're about to lose it. And Islam certainly did. Before I go into that, any other thoughts or questions that people might have? Okay. I'm looking at page 160. Um, and there are 2 points in here. I would read through everything, but there are 2 points about how the press was not conducive to the spread of Islam. When you look down, okay, where it says language and script. The Arabic script used for writing many Islamic texts is cursive and calligraphic. Okay, when you use calligraphy, you're more interested in your swirls and having a girl's handwriting instead of a boy's handwriting. Okay, it often required skilled scribes to create beautiful manuscripts. While Islamic manuscripts are often celebrated for their artistic beauty, the intricacies of the Arabic script made the transition to printing more complex compared to the Latin script used for the Western languages. The Western script, while the Western alphabet, it was very uniform, very easy to reproduce, especially with movable type. You can't really do that with Islamic script of that day. Okay, they were more concerned about supposedly bringing glory to Allah. Okay, so they wanted beautiful scripts. Look down at the bottom there where it says cultural factors. The Islamic textual tradition had a strong focus on manuscript production as a form of art and poetry. They were not concerned about, okay, I'm sorry, piety, but they were also interested in poetry. No, art and piety. Thank you. Yeah, that makes it a little bit different, doesn't it? Okay, art and piety. They were more concerned about glory than they were about conveying ideas. That's because they had no ideas to convey. Okay. The production of manuscripts, including calligraphy and illuminations, was considered an esteemed craft. And this cultural emphasis on the art of manuscript production could have influenced the adoption of the printing uh, could have influenced the adoption of the printing press in the Islamic world. They could have brought that over. Okay, let's see. Okay, then the next bullet point on the top of page 161. Europe's Renaissance and Reformation periods uh, characterized by a thirst for knowledge and intellectual exploration, created a conducive environment for the rapid dissemination of ideas through print and text. If you've got to copy an Islamic text and you got to worry about all the hand painting that goes on the pages to be able to do that, doesn't lend itself to making many books. But when you got the printing press and you want to, and you've got the competition of ideas now, boom, it is going all over the place. The religious and cultural dynamics of the time played a role in driving demand for printed materials. So this is what's going to give us the on the top of page 161 there, the bold print there, advancement on Bible translations. Oh yeah, boy, that's going to make the printing press is going to facilitate that. It's going to make that come about. So the printing press, I'm reading paragraph 438. The printing press had a profound and direct impact on Bible translation. The availability of the printing press revolutionized the process of producing and distributing Bibles, making it easier to translate, publish, and disseminate the scriptures to a wider audience. And of course, this is what's going to feed the Catholic Church, dissuading people to actually read the Bible. They would chain the Bible to the pulpit. Now, in all fairness to them, they didn't want them stolen because they were kind of precious and it was hard to produce a Bible. So it's not just they wanted to keep it out of the hands of people, but they are going to notice that as people get more of the Bible, that they start leaving Catholicism. And Nancy was taught, and not some Catholics today will say, I was never taught that, but Nancy was taught, you don't interpret the Bible for yourself. You have to have a priest do it. That is part of the catechism. Yes, Joe? Got that? Is that true? That's true, right? Yeah. Okay. So it's like, don't try to read it on your own. You have to have the priest do it. Now, I know in some Catholic circles today, they might have some more Bible study, but really that's still there. The priest has got to interpret it for you. If you don't have a priest to give some authoritative statement that's left over from the dogmatic years, then, you're not supposed to countenance and entertain it at all. Um, so, uh, so, so the explosion of the Bible is with the printing press, as I said, all these factors coming together are going to feed into the spirit of the Reformation. Okay, bullet point number one: before the printing press, Bibles were handwritten. Now you've got people being able to have it in their own languages, and this was something the Catholic Church uh, it either discouraged or forbade because they didn't have their scholars producing these things. These were lesser men who were trying to meet the needs of their congregations and bring it into English, into French and German. Um, this would lead to, in the second bullet point, the vernacular languages, the common languages, and now each person in their country did not have to learn Latin in order to get the Bible. Third bullet point: the printing press played a pivotal role in the Protestant Reformation. Figures like Martin Luther translated the Bible into German and used the printing press to distribute the translations and theological writings. allowed for the spread of new religious ideas. Um, okay. They could produce commentaries and annotations and cross references. Let's see. Okay, and then the last bullet point that they could contribute to the laity um, being involved. Okay, I am not going to go into dissenters. That'll mark the beginning of another aspect of what's leading into the Reformation and how they did. But right now, I'm saying that the technology, whether it was the economic systems or the printing systems, uh, the the free market system being available, you can see why this is a very big moment that's about to take place. Any questions or thoughts you'd like to bring up?
Pastor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had a thought from what you were talking about before we leave. I just wondered what your preference was: side, or angle, or side, or angle.
Depends on which ones I'm given. If I got two angles on this side, I'll take, and that's the one I need to. If you don't give me side, then I'll do side angle side.
And
Okay.
remember to study your theorems and postulates.
Yes.
They are your tools to do the equations.
To do the proofs.
Right.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
That much I got out of school. I remembered.
Yeah. I was looking at a thing the other day, actually, about a square being made up of two triangles and why a triangle, its angles have to add up to 180 every time. And I was looking at the proof for that. So yeah, that's a good one. Okay. You can forget your geometry. Yes.
Good afternoon, praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Going back to the Stoic.
Okay. The Stoics.
So they did have an influence as to the dogma of ethics and morals into the Catholic Church, or
Well, okay.
the Catholic Church.
Only as much as people like Augustinian brought them in, but Stoicism really had sort of died out and been taken over by Aristotelianism. Um, those were all I don't want to say pre-Christian era. They were BC. Yeah. Uh, you're going to get some of that leftover influence in the theological schools. So some of those guys were trained in some of those thinkings, but it's not like you then had further development of Stoicism. It's not like you had further development of Aristotelian thinking, where you were going to go from syllogisms over into like symbolic logic that you would later on. Um, so, uh, the influence it was left over in the theological schools, but they were more into developing dogmatic statements at that point. Yeah. So the philosophical, it wasn't completely gone. It was just like suppressed and not really, it wasn't in development, not until it became its own discipline from like the Reformation onward. And then you had, the growth of all that. Somebody else.